Hi, my name is Jannie Taylor, and today I'll be demonstrating winding a warp for the little weaver using a method called back to front warping using a raddle. So we'll need our warping board, we'll need our threads that we'll use for the warp, we'll need some heavy cord for making our various ties, and a pair of scissors. I'll be making two crosses, one at the top, the threading cross, and I'll use that when I'm threading my heddles, and the one at the bottom called the Raddle cross, and that's to make sure that I can distribute the warp evenly across the width as I wind it onto the warp beam. Because of the way the little weaver is made, it's easier to wind your warp in at least two bouts, one for each half. So because I'm going to be making two bouts of warp, I want them to be identical. So I've installed a guide string that I'll follow for both bouts, so they'll both be the same. So I'll just start winding my warp. I'll attach it here, and then I'll just follow the path of my guide string, up and over, down. When I get to the bottom, I'll be making my raddle cross, and so I'll start with the first two in there. I'm going to need 9 in each little raddle bundle. So now I've got 4. We'll keep on going. This is a warp that's a little over 3 yards long. So I came over and under, and this time I'm going to do just the opposite. I'll come over this peg and under this peg, so I'm making my cross right here. Okay, so I'm just going to come on around, over, under, and so on. Let me come on down to the raddle cross. Now I'm still making this. This will be 6 and then 8. I just need one more. So come on up. Over, around, over. Okay, so this time I have 8 in there. I just need one more, so I'll put one from my 2 strands in the first bundle, and I'll start the second bundle with the second thread. So I'm going to come on around. Now I have 3 in the second bundle, and that's getting started. And so come on up. I'm going to push these back as I go. Keep this nice and neat. And come on back up to the top. And there we go. I'll just continue along making my warp until I have this bout finished, and then I'll show you how we'll tie it off and get it ready to install on the loom. At the bottom, at the raddle cross, if I happen to run out of thread or need to make a color change, I need to be careful to tie in new pieces. I can't just tie a knot here and end these off. I need to have a continuous loop right through here that's going to hold all of my warp ends. And you'll see that later when we go to the loom, why that's so important. But for right now, just remember, no cut ends at the raddle end of the warp. I want to get in and show you a nice close-up of the threading cross as well. See, we're making a cross right here between the 2 pegs, and I'm coming over, under, around the far peg, and then back over, under, and on to finish these 2 warp ends. Sometimes you might see something right in somewhere else that looks like a cross or some kind of a crossing, and it could be just that you've chosen a path that's not quite the same. Remember, there's only one true threading cross, and that will be this one here. These will disappear when we cut this warp loose off the warping board. Alright, I have my 130 ends for the first half of my warp bout all ready to go. So now I'm just going to start making the ties that I need to secure this before I take it off of the board. I pulled my warp out a little ways out onto the peg so I don't accidentally tie in my guide thread. So the first thing I'm going to do is tie the ties around my threading cross. And I'm just going to tie the 4 positions around the cross. Here we see the cross right here in the middle. And I'm just going to tie the 4 positions. So I've cut some little threads. I'm going to tie those on here. I can just tie this in a bow so I can take it off more easily later. So I'll tie the two top places. And the two bottom places. So now I have those all tied and I'm ready to go on to adding my choke ties. And those are very tight ties that keep the warp from shifting in length as I roll it onto the back beam. So I really want to come in here and tie this very tightly. Pull up on it good and firm. Give it a good tie. Once it's tied tightly, it's a good idea to just put a bow in there because we will want to take these off as we're winding on the warp. So that's nice and tight. Let me add another one. About every yard is good enough. I'm going to wrap it around there. Give it a good double tie there. Pull it up. And then I usually wrap it around again. Make sure it's nice and tight. So now I've got those all tied and I'm ready to tie off my rattle cross. And this is a little different process. I've set the warping board down flat so you can better see how I'm going to be tying off this rattle cross. Let's just start down here. I'm going to pull it through, then come on up and pull it through. You can see that I've got each one kind of locked in its own little chain stitch there. I don't do it too tight. I want to have a little bit of space as I put it in the rattle. I want to be able to spread it out over the width that it needs to be. So if it's too tight, I won't be able to do that. I ended up with not quite a whole 9 for my last bout in it. That's fine. It won't be a problem. I'll just combine it with some from the next bout. So I'm going to be winding this warp off onto my kite stick. This is a method to keep your warp under control while you have it before you put it on the loom. So I'm going to start by just pulling this off. I want to start at the threading end because that's the end I'll need last, and I'll need the rattle cross when I go to put it on the loom. So we'll start at this end. Let me pull that off. It can be a little tight. I'm just going to put it on my kite stick. I've made a little lark's head here that I'm just going to put the stick right through. And now once I have that stick on there, I'm going to be just winding it onto the stick firmly. I'm going to have a good hold on it, and I'm giving it a nice firm crossing on here. I'm crossing over the front. Let me stand up over here. I'm crossing over the front, wrapping it around the back, crossing over the front, wrapping it around the back. And you can see that it's making a nice tight package, just keeping those threads all under control. So I'm just going to continue to do that until I have it all wound off. So when I get down to the bottom and I have my rattle cross, oh, one thing I forgot, and it's a crucial thing I don't want to forget, I need to tie this loop and make sure I can find this loop again when I'm ready to put the warp onto the loom. So I'm just going to put a tie around that. Good thing I noticed that. Alright, so now it's ready to come off. Okay, so I'll just kind of give this a little wrap and it's ready to go. And now I'll be making my second warp bout, and I have my guide string here, so it'll be identical to this one. Okay, I finished my second bout of the warp, so I have both of them on their kite sticks here. So I have the first one that we did together, and then I have the other one. So that's ready to go. Now, so we're ready to start putting the warp onto the loom using the Raddle. So we will need, of course, our Raddle, and this is a tool we use to maintain the proper width of the loom as it rolls on. You'll see how that works as we go along. A couple of other things I'll need to have on hand. I need a second rod for the back warp beam, so I have that. Eventually, when I come to the threading cross, I'll need my lee stick, so I'll set those aside for now. I don't need those quite yet. I have a couple of these great little Velcro ties that you can find at the hardware store. We'll use these to hold the Raddle together and to hold the rod onto the warp beam rod. So we'll keep a hold of those. The other thing we'll need is our brown craft paper that we'll use for packing the warp as it goes along to keep the layers separated. So this is just brown craft paper available at any craft store. I cut it into lengths of about a yard, maybe a little less, and I fold in the sides about an inch or so, just so when it rolls on, it's going to roll on evenly, and this folded space will take the space up that the warp threads are taking up. So it's more likely that I'm going to end up with a nice solid cylinder rather than a kind of a hump in the middle. So this works really well. The other thing I'll need when I get to the front is some heavier paper about the weight. This is about the weight of a cereal box. You should be able to find something like this around the house. We just need the width of your warp, so we have that. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start by putting the Raddle right on the loom. So I'll just install that right there. Make sure it's all the way seated down. Take the top off. And we're ready to begin. I've marked the center of this, so I'll know that this one half is for one of my warp bouts, and the other half is for the other, so I'll know right where the center is all the time. I won't have to always be counting for it. It's a good thing to do. All right, I've unwound my first bout a little bit, and I'm looking over my Raddle cross, the little chain that I made of it, and you can see these little bundles, and each one is going to go into one of the dents in the Raddle. I'm just going to start laying those in one at a time. Kind of spread them out of my hand. All right, let's put the first one in, and then we'll just slide right along, putting each one in its slot. Just take your time and get them all in there. It's actually pretty easy. Just takes a couple of minutes. And the last two. Come on in there. All right, so you can see that each one is in its own little, each one of those little bundles is in its own little dent in the Raddle. Okay, so now I'll start on the second one. I might just slide the top over to protect this first half. All right, so I have that half done. I'll unwind the second half a little. This is a pretty handy place to just set it right up here. I'll just slide this top over. Keep any of those from coming out. And I'll just go ahead and add a couple of our little Velcro ties. These little hook and loop tapes are very handy for all sorts of things around the weaving studio. Just going to hold that there for a little insurance. All right. Okay, now the next thing we're going to need to do is to tie this warp onto our the rod from our apron rod, from our back apron rod. So I'm going to just put this extra rod through that loop that I almost forgot to tie earlier. Make sure I have everybody looped around and I've got that loop. Same thing on the second one. Okay, so I have those two on the second rod. Now I'm just going to tie these two rods together again using a little more of our little handy sticky tape. Let's line those up and wrap this around. It shouldn't be super tight. I want that to move around a little bit so it can spread out to its full width. So I've got that tied and it's pretty even. That looks pretty good. Okay, at this point I'll just untie these ties so we can spread it. We don't need those anymore. As we're finished with something, it's a good idea to just get rid of it. Just take it away. It served its purpose. Okay, I'm going to just try to more or less spread this to the width that we want. The other magic thing I'm going to do right now is take this chain off. I don't need this anymore. I fed the rattle, and so I've used its usefulness. Its usefulness is over. So now I can just, if I just pull it, it just comes right off. So I'll take one off, and then I'll take the other one off. Again, just pull that right off. Alright, so now I have it tied on here. I've got it through the rattle, and I'm ready to start beaming it onto the back warp beam.